Okay, this is a generic T-34 video detailing the creation and installation of track. So you're gonna need some strips of cereal box cardboard, about 1.5 millimeters wide. I wouldn't bother measuring them. Just try to guess. Maybe measure a few and then just guess the rest. There's going to be some variation, but you don't really notice it. Just cut some relatively thin strips. And the size of the pads is actually up to you. If you make them quite thin, you'll need a lot more of them. If you make them quite thick, then it takes less. But they don't really look as good if they're like 2.5 millimeters or something like that. So once you have about 5 strips like that, I would cut them together into pads. And the actual width of the track for the T-34 is 8 millimeters. So I cut these a little bit longer than 8 millimeters, about 1 centimeter. But I'm generous with my estimation of 1 centimeter, so that I'm definitely not cutting any short pieces. Because if they're short, you can't use them. So you're going to need about 35 of these per side. So about 30 to 35 of these per side, depending on how close together they are and how wide they are. So about 60 to 70 per tank. And they're long, so you have something to grip them and set them by. Otherwise, it's actually a lot harder to get short ones, even if they're exactly the right length. It's harder to get them to work. So once you've got some bits there, you'll cut a lot more than that, but I've already got a little bit of a pile over here. Take some drywall fiber tape, and for the T-34, you measure 19 centimeters, but you can use this for almost any vehicle as a guide to making track. So, I mean, if you've watched one track video, you've kind of watched them all, except for the length and width. So cut your piece of drywall fiber tape at around 19 centimeters. And then just estimate about halfway and cut it in half. Now for the T-34, you're only going to get 1 tank's worth for this. If you're doing tanks with thinner track, you might get more. But you'll almost always be able to, like 1:72 scale, be able to get 2 bits of track from 1 length of drywall fiber tape. So take the drywall fiber tape and you want to set it gluey or sticky side to sticky side, and don't like reverse the ends, because as long as you're gluing the same end to the same end, these thick lines will follow the same distance pattern between each other. And the way to get this nice and straight so you can cut accurate bits of track out is to set one, at least, well, you're trying to offset all the lines, so you're creating double the amount of squares, or actually 4 times the amount of squares. So 1 becomes 4. But I'm just going to, like, with my eye, look at this line here all the way, and just only looking at this line and its relative distance between these 2 lines that it's in between. So as long as I keep that line centered, all of these other lines will be straight down the piece of drywall tape. And so that's all I'm going to pay attention to, and I'm going to try to make this as straight as possible, a bond between them, by just following that one line as closely as I can with my eye, never looking away. Because some of the other lines not be centered, and so if you accidentally start following a different line with your eyes, you may mess up the straightness. And the reason that you do it like that is because now we're going to cut. So choose whichever side is actually the edge of the drywall tape originally. Will be a little bit, you'll see some of these thicker ones have been kicked up or to the side a little bit. So we're going to take the other side and we're going to cut most of our length of track from this way in. And so we just want to straighten up this edge. So cut it right along the nearest thin line. So just taking off all the excess little overhanging bits. Now, with our actual track, there may be one side with overhanging bits. Don't bother to take those off. Like, I'll just show you as an example. It's 8mm that we're cutting for the T-34. So if this line doesn't end exactly on one of these lines, and is in the middle, we'll leave the overhang because it takes it to 8mm, is kind of what I'm saying. So, but it's a lot easier to measure off of one of these actual lines. So at least one of the edges will be solid track line, rather. So it's looking like if I cut right inside this short line here, so if I cut just shy of this line, that's 8mm. So I'm going to cut my piece of track now, and I'm just going to cut right along this line, which will make cutting the next one easy, because I don't have to trim the drywall tape at all before I continue. So just cut really carefully and straight, and keep your eye out to see if these thin lines do kind of sway one way or the other. You don't want to follow that. But they shouldn't if you've laid your bit of drywall tape down correctly. You shouldn't have to modify that. So this will be my 8mm bit and 21mm or 21 centimeters in length. Now I've already got a bit going here. I've got a bunch of stuff made already, so I'll show you with this one. But cut 2 for each vehicle. Now I've got some 4:1 glue, and sometimes you need to add a little water or a little glue to make it just the right viscosity for this job. The effect you're looking for is that it forms a fairly good skin easily. So if it's too thick, it will be very difficult to get it to plug all or most of these holes. And if it's too thin, they'll just instantly plug. So you're kind of looking for a middling thing where you get about 90% of the holes to fill with glue pretty easily, but they're not all full. If they're all full, you either have too much glue and you have to spread it out more, or your glue is too watery and you need to add some glue. So if you have too much glue, these pads, as you set them on, will kind of swim around, and it makes it a lot more difficult, because once you've set them on there, you don't really want to have to touch them much ever again. If you touch this one, then you might have to touch that one, and then it's a domino effect. So set them about as far apart as they are wide. So I could slip a track pad just in between these, but I'm not going to. I will never do that. It's just that I could. Kind of looks cool if you set them about that distance. And have all your overhangs to one end. And you can do about 1/3 of the track before you have to set it aside. So I'm just going to do a little bit more. as quickly as I can. You might want to go a little bit slower than this. It does take some getting used to get these to sit nicely. So don't get frustrated if it's taking you a little bit longer than it takes me, because it is a bit of a torturous process, but it does look good in the end. So we'll try to get a third of this done fairly quickly here. And the reason you can't do more is that one end gets really heavy, and that same end is very delicate. So, oh, you can use your two fingers if you're having trouble setting the track properly. You can kind of kick it around with this other finger a bit on the flush side. So you can use two. You're not just trying to place it in the right place and let go. That's the quickest way to do it, but if they're offset or off kilter, then you can use your other finger to help move them a little bit. So try to keep them fairly even. And so this is about the right amount to set aside. So a little bottle of paint, or this is a super glue bottle, and you want a counterweight. So take a couple of these clips and just counterweight against the weight of that. Set it aside to dry like this until you can continue. And when you continue, so I've got these ones, they're almost done. When you start getting towards the end, I'll show you, you want to leave at least a centimeter, more like 1.5 centimeters of blank drywall tape, drywall fiber tape. And we're going to use that to glue the track to itself to make it form one continuous piece. And there's always a little bit extra pads on there so that we can modify its length so it's perfect or close to that. So you don't need a whole lot of material at the end, but you do need at least 1 centimeter, and I believe with 19 centimeters it leaves you probably close to 2 at most before you start needing to, oh, I need to actually add a pad, this isn't enough. So I would take it to about here. You might not have to put this last pad on, but leave at least this much blank space at the end. So about 1 centimeter, 1.5 centimeters. I'll set that aside.